This is the Amp Hour Podcast. Released December 27th, 2020. Episode 523. A Keyzermas story.
Welcome to the Amp Hour. I'm Dave Jones from the EEV blog.
And I'm Chris Campbell of Contextual Electronics.
And this is Jeff Keyzer of Mighty Ohm.
Let's do it, Chris.
Hey, guys.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
It is so great to be back.
I still don't know why that's a thing. I still don't get it.
I think it's all in Chris's mind.
Yeah,
I
I
think
play
so.
along. Yep.
Yeah, it is. I'm dreaming of a Keyzermas. I've been waiting all year for this, Jeff. All year.
I know. As have I. As have I.
You know, especially because last year we, got to hang out at conferences, and this year, of course, nothing, man. No Jeff on the Amp Hour. So
I know.
2020 needed this desperately.
Exactly.
Yep.
This is what's going to cause 2020 to heal.
Right.
Well, I was just thinking that this means that we've made it. Right? I mean, I don't want to jinx it. We still have a couple weeks left, but we've basically made it.
The asteroid could still be on the way,
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. Come right for us.
Well, thanks for having me on the show again, guys. It is
what
great to
what's
be
new?
Oh, what is new? I don't know. Life has been different this year. My life, just like everybody's.
Start by telling us where are you working now? Where were you working last year? Are you still doing the same gig?
Last year I was working for myself, and I am still doing the same thing now. So yes, no change. And actually,
business is good.
in a way, the whole pandemic has not been super disruptive to my everyday life because I was already working at home when this whole thing dropped. So, when everybody started transitioning to working at home, I had a head start. I've got the lab here. I have all the equipment I need at home. I've got nice home office set up with a big printer and, all the good internet and all the things that I needed. And so the big difference for us is that my wife also started working at home. And so normally I'd have the place to myself during the day, at least most days of the week. But now we've got both of us home all the time. And so it's been great. I mean, I think actually we see more of each other now than we did before. And so for us, it's been, I think, a positive change. But, obviously this year has been a doozy for everybody, and we are no exception. But I started doing freelance work more this year than I did last year. So I'm still doing the Geiger counter thing. I'm still selling hobby electronics kits. The Geiger counter business is still going. I just shipped off a big order to Elector in the Netherlands. They're my distributor in Europe. And so hopefully those kits will be available, I think, beginning of next year. And then I also just shipped a bunch to Adafruit. And I guess actually the big thing that's different for me this time of year is I'm selling on Amazon now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is a world of hurt for anyone who doesn't. Well, once it works, but getting it to that point.
I totally agree with you. It was awful getting listed on the store. It took about, I think, 6 weeks, maybe 2 months
I was following your tweet. Yeah, agony.
It was awful. And it was really awful because I had to jump through a lot of hoops as a small business that manufactures my own products. I was creating things which were not already part of the Amazon marketplace. They were new SKUs, new things that they didn't sell. And they make it quite challenging for somebody like me who has never sold on the store before to list new products, because I think they're trying to block fraud, and they're trying to block having 50 copies of the same product being sold by 50 different sellers. And so they try really hard to discourage people from listing new products. And so I had to jump through a bunch of hoops because I've been a seller on Amazon for a decade. I mean, I've sold used books and, stuff like that, but I've never sold product. And so I already had the account, but I had to sort of jump through a lot of hoops in order to prove that I owned my own business, that I had a trademark. So they require you to have a trademark, which I coincidentally had already filed a couple years ago because this has been on my mind for a long time. And they also require you to have UPC codes, which
yes.
that's kind of the most irritating of the requirements, because unlike trademarks, which you file once and then you have forever, UPC codes, you need to pay a consortium that exists, I think, primarily to collect money from businesses that want to sell products, but you have to pay them every year.
Is that like the barcode and stuff like that?
Really?
Like what is the UPC?
Yes.
No, but I've got barcodes for all my products. I bought a block of like 20 barcodes like 5 years ago, and I've never had to renew them. I just bought.
That is not kosher anymore.
Oh, damn. Okay.
And so actually, I think if you look around, you'll get a lot of mixed opinions about this. But the thought is that Amazon is kind of clamping down on the reuse, because technically each manufacturer is supposed to have their own prefix code, which means that you can't resell barcodes, but people have been doing that for a very long time. And so I think a lot of sellers are...
Yeah, I just bought them from like onlinebarcodes.com or some site like that,
yeah. And so those sites still exist, but the word on the street is that Amazon is going to stop allowing that. And so for new sellers... So if you've been doing this for a few years, you're grandfathered in. I don't think there's a big problem. But for a new seller, I had to prove that my business name matched my trademark, which matched the registrant for the UPC codes, which are actually, I think, GTIN codes. It's GS1 is the organization that sort of controls this. And this is like when you walk into a supermarket and you look on a box of crackers, there's a barcode. That's the barcode. And so now I own a very, very tiny block in the number space. I mean, I think I literally own a block of 10 barcodes. So it's infinitesimally small, but now I have to pay a yearly fee to sort of maintain that, which is super irritating.
Wow.
And so so to kind of rewind to the beginning, I had this dream years ago that I was going to sell on Amazon, because I realized that it's becoming a really important marketplace. And I mean, I don't know how it is in Australia, but at least in the United States, Amazon is a pretty big presence, especially now that the pandemic is upon us.
It's just gotten big here this year, like literally this year. It's just gotten big. Whereas before that, it was like, meh,
So I myself am sort of an Amazon fiend. I looked up how many orders on Amazon I have placed in 2020. And I was
never good.
Shocked. I was shocked to see the number, and it was about double what 2019 was. And so,
well, come on, man, you can't leave us hanging. What is the number?
I know. Come on, this is engineering. We need a quantifiable.
As of today, 2020 was 333 orders, and I think 87 of those within the past 3 months.
Whoa.
So, yeah,
I think I got to look now. I got to look. How do you look this up?
Go to your order history, and then it'll show you, and you can change the drop down to change the time range.
Okay,
that's a package. More than one a day.
Just under,
almost.
actually.
Oh, sorry, 300. And so, yeah.
I wish 2020 only had 333
So
days,
is this because you're buying stuff for the business too? Is that like the problem?
I buy stuff for everything. Yeah. So a lot of it is for the business. A lot of it is, like packaging supplies, like shipping tape and boxes and bubble wrap and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we buy all of our microphones for guests on there. So I have 123 orders, of which I'm guessing 20 of those are microphones.
There you go.
So I feel a little better, but I also
wouldn't have anything close to that. That being said, I do have a package turning up today, which is Saturday, and tomorrow, which is Sunday.
Yeah.
So why they don't combine them in the one shipment, I don't know. But
it gets worse, Dave. I mean, that's the thing. Like,
right?
Yeah.
So I thought that it would be interesting to sell product on there because it's a new marketplace, and especially with the fulfillment by Amazon, I ship product to their warehouse.
Oh yes, I use that. But you pay about I don't know what you pay, but I pay about 18% total because I get them to do the fulfillment. If you don't do the fulfillment, it's about 11 or 12%.
Yeah. That sounds about right. Yeah. And there's also storage costs too. So if you have a bunch of stuff in their warehouse,
if it's large stuff,
you.
they actually calculate like shelf space and stuff like that.
Yep.
So
Yep. And so the great thing though is that as a seller, I go to the post office It depends. Sometimes 3 times a week, if it's a busy time for me, usually once or twice a week, just to mail parcels for my business. And, I mail a lot of personal stuff too, but the reason I go is that I don't want to let a week go by and have an order come in and then somebody's just waiting. And so I go to the post office very often, and I was interested in reducing the number of times by allowing Amazon to do some of the fulfillment. And I also thought that just by listing my product in a new marketplace, I would sort of pick up. It's sort of like advertising, because there's people that stumble upon it. The thing that so having been selling on Amazon for a couple months now, I dramatically underestimated how much of a pain in the ass it was going to be to list products, because as I tweeted through the process, it was awful. And now that I'm through it, back to what you said, Dave, it's correct that once you get through all the hoops, it's actually not bad. It's pretty hands
Yeah,
off.
it works.
Replenishing inventory is easy. It all works great.
Oh, I get the boxes in. They're already pre-printed with my barcode. So my multimeters, the boxes are already pre-printed with my custom barcode. And then I don't even open the boxes anymore. I just reship the boxes from here to the US and the US fulfillment center. It's so easy.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So what I found is that, I was expecting to get a lot of new sales for being on kind of a new marketplace. And I found that that's true to an extent. Like, I've done okay. But one of the things I dramatically underestimated is that if you look at my products, they're not at the top of their category. And so having visibility in the Amazon store is actually very hard. And, if somebody's not looking for my kits, they're probably not going to find them.
They're not going to
just
stumble
by,
upon it.
If they enter Geiger counter, it's like, page 3. So it's probably not going to get much visibility. And so that's been, I think, a little underwhelming. But I think that I'm glad that I did it, because it's been somewhat successful in terms of number of sales. I've definitely sold more kits on Amazon than I was expecting, which has been really good. But yeah, the hilarious thing with the barcodes is that, in order to list on Amazon as a manufacturer of your own goods, you have to own a trademark, which is going to cost you a few $100 to $1,000 in the United States to file a trademark application. And it takes about 6 months to get a trademark. So you can't just decide tomorrow you're going to be an Amazon seller if you haven't already done that. You have to have the barcodes, which you need to purchase a block in order to, get your company prefix. Now, if you're grandfathered in like Dave is, you don't have to worry about that. But for a new seller, you need to do that. And now I totally forgot where I was going with that. and then you list on Amazon, and it's great.
It sucks at the first, but then it stops sucking.
And it sucks, but it stops. I think that for me, the hardest part was just convincing them that I was real and that I should be able to sell my own products.
Right. Yeah. I sell huge volumes of multimeters on Amazon. It's it's absolutely amazing. And of course I mark up the price on there, but people, because of the 18% commission with the fulfillment by Amazon, but they're always sending me, they're always like, they will estimate how many you should be sending and stuff like that, like ahead of time. And they're saying, please send another 300 multimeters. It's like, holy crap, that's my entire shipment. It's like, because the volume is just but it took years. I've been selling for quite a few years on there, and it took a while for it to get up there in the search engine rankings. And now but I'm doing a search now just for multimeter, and mine's not showing up, but I just sell, like, I don't even advertise that it's on Amazon, and I just sell huge volumes of them. So it must be getting up there somewhere.
So the thing I was going to say that for me was the kind of most hilarious part of the process is that you have to go buy the barcodes, the UPC codes, you put those on your product, but then when you ship your product to an Amazon warehouse, depending on the type of product, you often have to put a manufacturer's barcode on the product, which is a lot of times when you buy stuff on Amazon, it'll come with a little barcode that's got the name of the product. And then it's kind of a wide rectangular barcode. It doesn't look like a UPC, but it's an Amazon barcode. So they require you as a manufacturer to put that on your product so that it's not commingled with other products of the same name. So that's a whole tangent, but there's a lot of problems with fraud in Amazon because
what I'm hearing here, Dave, is that we can actually go and manufacture this instead of Jeff. We can just go.
We can. That's what I was thinking.
So that is a big problem. Is that So somebody somebody could start making Geiger counters that are Mighty Ohm Geiger counters and ship a whole bunch to Amazon, and then they get thrown into the same box, and pretty soon customers are buying those instead. Well, so that you can't actually do that because I apply a manufacturer's barcode, which assigns that product to me as a specific seller. And the hilarious thing about it is that Amazon only allows one barcode to be visible on the product. So I paid a bunch of money to get a UPC code. I put it on the product, and then I literally put another label with a barcode on top of that barcode. And that was like peak despair for me. That was when I threw up my arms and was like, you gotta be freaking kidding me. Like, this is totally insane. It's just I think it's a great metaphor for sort of the bureaucracy and just the, I don't know, irritating way that Amazon makes sellers sort of jump through hoops in order to list.
But you can understand why they're doing it, though, can't you? It's so, the scale is so enormous, and the fraud is so enormous. And there's all those ones that reship. Have you anyone reship your products? Like there's automated software you can buy, right? For they're not scammers. They're just, well, they're resellers. There's a word for it. Anyway, these predatory resellers, there's automated software you can buy somewhere in the market that you can just pick like categories of products that are popular, and it'll search for popular products on Amazon, and then it will automatically relist them on your eBay account at an inflated price. And then once it gets the order, it handles everything. Someone orders on eBay, the system automatically takes that order, orders it from Amazon, and ships it direct to that person's address, redirects it to that address. So they order on eBay, and then it turns up in an Amazon box, and they go, "What? I ordered this from eBay."
Why do they do that though? Is it just because it's just some people are only looking on eBay?
They make a commission on each sale, and it's hands off. You don't have to do anything.
It's like arbitrage, right?
Yeah. It's like an arbitrage type thing, but with real products. Yeah.
But the idea is that people don't know that it's actually cheaper elsewhere. Is that the thought?
That's right, because people search on eBay and they don't know it's cheaper on Amazon, and then you rely on that fact.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I choose to sell my products on eBay and Amazon and on my website and through distributors, is that these marketplaces are, sometimes they feel like they're little isolated spheres. And I think one thing that feeds into that is that each one of them has their own sort of currency. Like eBay, you can get credits when you buy products, and then you can only spend those eBay bucks on eBay. And so you sort of do have these incentives.
Oh, we don't have that here.
Oh, interesting. That's existed in the US for quite a while.
Right.
So you have these captive currencies.
I've got 1,000 feedback on eBay, and I've got like 3 different eBay accounts for various things, and I've been selling.
Well, you don't get it for selling things.
Decade.
You only get it for buying things. When you buy things on eBay.
I buy a lot of stuff on eBay, but I've never seen any credits. Maybe my account sitting on a ton
Jeff,
of credits.
you're saying as a buyer, right? So you're saying like, so I know Amazon does that too, because it's like you buy something there, and they're like, hey, here's $5 towards a book or some digital product that's like that has no margin difference for them. It's basically they're giving you the advertising budget to come back and buy something else.
Right. Yeah. So on eBay, if you buy enough product, you get, and it's some infinitesimally small percent, but you get some percent of the purchase price credited to you as a gift certificate that expires. And that's one of the kind of irritating things about the way eBay does it, is that if you don't spend it within the quarter, you lose it. But as a result, I think this is one of the reasons to want to list your product as a seller on a marketplace like eBay, because maybe there's somebody there who does a whole bunch of purchasing for their job, or for whatever reason, they have a ton of credit. That credit only exists on eBay. And so they may be willing to spend more money on eBay because for them, it's kind of free, like they might be getting that credit for some other reason. And it's likewise for Amazon. It's kind of it has its own thing. People get gift certificates for Amazon that are only good at Amazon. And so one of the things I wanted to do as a seller was to just make sure that, any marketplace that's on there, I'm on Tindy, I'm on as many as I can find, just because you kind of do pick up a little bit of sales here or there.
All right. Wow, that sounds a little bit different to what we got here, but anyway, yeah, we are just come into the, like, I think only, was it? No, it was 2019. No, late 2018. We actually got Australian Amazon warehouses. So before that, we never had them. You had to order from Amazon US. Like, we've always been able to order the books, but it's only fairly recently that they've got into selling some products here to Australia, like allowing shipment of some products.
Yeah, I remember because we started looking for like mics for guests that were in Australia, I think, at some point, and it actually popped up at one point. So
and it just won't let you ship a bunch of stuff here. So
so I worked for a well-known game company, and we had a product that was sold on Amazon. And one of the things that was interesting for me is that you would be selling that product on Amazon US, and all of a sudden people in other countries would be getting the product. And it turns out that, at least at that time, and probably still today, if you live in another country, say Australia, New Zealand, you can order product from Amazon.com and they will ship it to you in your country, which is interesting from a hardware manufacturing point of view, because that product, you might have a different SKU that was supposed to be used in Australia, New Zealand, but instead people are getting the US SKU, which creates a bunch of complexity. And I found that interesting. Amazon has sort of an interesting approach. I think they sort of turn a blind eye to a lot of that and just sort of let it happen. If
but
someone's
willing
to pay the
categories
shipping,
of products though that they will ship to Australia. Oh yeah, there's certain limited categories that you can get shipped here. Some entire categories are just blanket ban from.
Oh, interesting.
So Jeff, this is kind of tied to your other stuff you've been doing too. So like, do you know in that scenario, is it possible that like some of those SKUs would actually only be certified, like FCC certified, versus Australia FCC equivalent certified? Is that kind of the thought there?
It's really up to the manufacturer. So, the manufacturer that I worked for, we tried to certify as many countries as possible under a single SKU, because that's much easier. You don't have to track. The worst thing as a manufacturer is that you sell out of one SKU and now no one from that region can buy your product. And meanwhile, you could have a warehouse full of the ones for, Ireland or something, right? Like, and so now you have this big problem because your customers are angry and you have all this product, but it's just not the right product for the country that you're trying to sell it to. So, we tried to do as much as possible to have a single SKU for all regions, but that's not typical. I think most manufacturers, especially high volume manufacturers, will have separate SKUs for different kind of major regions. And the reason they do that is that hardware certification is complex enough that not only are the certifications often slightly different, but the timing is often very different. Like, you may not get your China certification for 6 months to a year after you start selling in the US, just because of how slowly that certification. And I actually don't know if China's the worst one, but there are countries that are particularly difficult. Like, I think India is very challenging. South America, there's some countries like Brazil is kind of notoriously difficult. But there's some countries where it takes a long time to certify. So if you want to launch your product in 2020, you might not be certified in a certain country until midway through 2021. And so why wait? You can't wait. You have to create another SKU. And the other thing is that a lot of times products are localized. Like, it's not a great customer user experience if you buy a product in Zimbabwe and you open it and it has an English quick start guide or a French quick start guide or something. Like, that's not great.
But I find a lot of products will have, like, they will come with the plug pack, but the plug pack will have all these interchangeable mains pins on it. So you slide in the Australian one and you get these, you end up with a tub full of, these useless slide-on adapters.
I've worked on a mains powered product, and it is a huge pain in the ass, not only because the plugs are different, but because the cords are sometimes different. And even just researching what cord, like the safety rating of the power cord, as well as the end that plugs into the wall, you would think that would be very easy to figure out, but no, it's actually not, because some countries have multiple standards. And I mean, I'm not even including different voltages and frequencies too. I mean, with switching power supplies, it's gotten a lot easier. But yeah, that's when you see that, where you end up with a bucket of adapters, that's because that manufacturer is trying to reduce overhead by just having a single SKU for all regions, which to me is smart engineering.
Negative externalities, right? Because you can't charge for the, like that. I mean, that's effectively just like shipping plastic that you don't need. It's just going to get thrown out. But like, there's no penalty for doing that, and so that's that's just the environmental cost is what the brunt of that thing, and they're like, all right, whatever, no big deal.
Yep. Well, if you're a hoarder like me, you keep those adapters, and just in case someday you might need them.
Just in case. Even though you can't get them back off, they're really like a one-way clip-on thing.
Yeah,
I find often
they probably were not cycle tested.
Yeah.
Yeah. they're not. If you're traveling between the UK and US on a weekly basis, they probably didn't take that into account.
No. Oh.
So Jeff, you've been doing some of this testing stuff, right? I mean, you've been doing some testing for clients and getting like products ready for.
I did a couple. Yep, I did a couple projects this year in which I worked on regulatory compliance and sort of as an advisor, trying to make recommendations. I haven't spent any time in the lab this year, which is good for me because I've not wanted to do that. I'm actually not sure how EMC labs have been handling this whole thing because that's a very in person in the same room in typically small enclosed spaces with questionable ventilation. So that's my heart goes out to those guys.
I had one thing go through UL and it was literally like a clandestine, like drop it off the dock on like a Friday afternoon sort of thing. And it was just like, and then like 2 months later, they're like, yeah, you're fine. And I was like, oh, okay. Okay. That's we'll see how that plays out. But it was also like an early test. It wasn't like the full testing. It was just like early testing. So
yep.
Not great is the answer in my experience so far.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel for those guys. But I mean, that's work that needs to continue. So I have no doubt that all the EMC labs in this area are still open because, people are still designing and shipping products. Microsoft hasn't just stopped in designing new products because of this. But yeah, I've been doing some consulting on EMC and product safety, which is kind of it's a side area for me. It's something that I've done work in for kind of a long time now. And
can you define both of those areas for people that don't know what they are?
Oh, so EMC is electromagnetic compatibility, which is making sure that your product doesn't radiate harmful interference that can cause other products to stop working, like airplanes. You don't want airplanes to stop working around you. And it's also to make sure
they
that
do
your
that on
product...
their own. Thank you very much. Max 737 will stop working on its own.
I heard Ryanair just bought a bunch of those.
Yeah.
Deep discount.
Yeah, almost certainly.
Sure.
Yeah. And it's also to make sure that your product is not interfered with it doesn't receive interference from other products so that, you don't have a widget that resets itself when you open your garage door and stuff like that. So that's EMC, and ESD, electrostatic discharge, is a part of EMC. That's on what's called the immunity side. And that's making sure that when you don't scuff your feet on the carpet and touch a product from across the room, it doesn't reset or, even worse, stop working permanently. So that's all part of EMC, which is some of which is required in the US. Actually, surprisingly little is required in the US, but Europe is really good about requiring quite a lot and is sort of the global benchmark for what products should do. And actually, a lot of products in the US are probably better off for it because those products are also shipped into Europe, which has better, in my opinion, more restrictive standards. So EMC is sort of one big category. And a lot of times you'll have companies, like big companies will have EMC engineers and, people that specialize in finding and fixing and also dealing with all of the bureaucratic, there's a lot of documentation and paperwork and things like that, labeling and marks that need to go on products. The other thing, if you sort of take a step back, and an entirely separate but related area is product safety, which is not, I guess it is a product a choking hazard, although it sort of depends on the product.
I was just imagining Jeff just sitting there trying to put circuit boards in his mouth. He's like, yeah, I'm testing.
I think small fuses. You can't have a pack of spare fuses in there. The kiddies will eat them.
You just got to put a hole in the middle, like Lifesavers or Cheerios,
I have not... I think that is actually a thing. I haven't worked on a product that was classified a toy in that way, but I think there is actually a model windpipe. Like there is a defined clearance that products need to not get stuck in order to avoid children choking on them. But product safety includes other stuff too, like making sure the product doesn't catch on fire or burn somebody's house down, making sure that it's not too hot to touch, making sure that if it's caught on fire by something else, like sparks dropping down from something else, that it then does not catch on fire. And in the US, UL is a very well-known lab that focuses on product safety. And so there's all these requirements that are specifically pertaining to product safety. And again, Europe kind of has their act together much better than the US. And Europe actually combines EMC and product safety into what's called CE. And you see CE on a lot of things. Like most consumer products these days are CE marked so that they can be sold in Europe. And actually, the rest of the world follows suit. Like most of the rest of the world is harmonized to CE, such that if you pass the requirements for EU, most likely you're going to be able to sell anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, it's not guaranteed, but it's a good start.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some countries
you
still require
in-country
testing.
Yeah, generally.
Yep.
And so, Jeff, when you're doing the EMC side of things, I mean, we've had Dr. Howard Johnson on the show before. We've had Henry Ott on the show, and obviously we've had you on the show, and other people. I'm trying to think of them all. Sorry, but anyways, what are you usually doing when you are approaching the actual tests versus just So like Dave's done videos about having like a loop tester on the end of a probe, and like that's good for testing.
Yeah,
is that the same
great.
kind of testing you're doing in the lab, or actually with for the compliance piece?
No, you're usually only doing that when things go wrong. So those are debugging tools so you can do those in the lab, but you're paying a lot because you're usually paying the lab by the hour to stay open for you. No, actually, most of the tests, well, there's quite a number of tests and they're all different, but the tests that you think of that I think to me are sort of probably the ones that you do first are the like radiated emissions tests, which are done in an EMC chamber. So it's a big room that's shielded. So a big shield box that has anti-reflective material like cones on usually 4 sides, maybe 5 sides. I'd have to look at that. But often the walls, but not the floor, which is actually significant because that can create reflections. That's kind of another story. But anyway, it's this big box that has anti-reflective cones inside. And it has a big antenna at one end or in one corner. And then you put your product on a table that's at the other end of the room. And the product is on a turntable. So it actually rotates. And that antenna moves up and down and can rotate polarization. And so it records the received signal in a variety of orientations to look for whatever the worst case is. And they run it through sort of this automated sweep, which takes some number of minutes depending on the settings of the test. And that's sort of, I think, what is the most, I don't know, most people that see an EMC lab are going to see that part. There's actually quite a lot of other things too that are done in different rooms with different equipment, but that's usually the place that you start, or that's one of the most important tests for a new product. And so, yeah, it's not done. It's an attempt to measure the far field. So, when you're using those little loop probes, you're measuring near field because you're very close to the product. You're less than a wavelength away. And so you're typically like right on top of the product trying to figure out what thing is emanating a particular type of interference. But the EMC chamber is trying to operate in the far field. And it's actually a little bit tricky because some chambers are quite small, such that actually at lower frequencies, because they're typically tested from 30 megahertz to some number of gigahertz, at the low end, the chamber might not be big enough. And there's these correction factors that are applied, and people argue about how accurate that stuff is at the low end. Anyway, it's, the antenna is receiving the signal that's essentially being inadvertently transmitted from your product.
And for those who don't know, I've done a video on this. The difference between near field and far field is near field, the electromagnetic wave is separate. You have the magnetic field, which is the H field, and the E field, the electric field. They're actually separate. And then only at a certain distance, which is lambda on, help me out here, Jeff. It's lambda on 4 or something. Anyway, it's a factor. So a certain distance out from the product, like a meter or 2 meters or something like that, the magnetic field and the electric field actually start to combine to become your electromagnetic field, the electromagnetic wave that you're more familiar with. But up close to the product, they're actually separate. That's why that little coil probe you hook onto your oscilloscope and hook up to a little amplifier, that's actually a magnetic field probe. Mm-hmm. Which is different. You can get an E field probe and a H field probe. They're actually very different things when they're near field to the product. So, but the far field, in quote marks, is when they combine.
The other thing about the near field is that if you put something in the near field, it's easy to become a part of the antenna. You can dramatically influence the pattern of the antenna by putting a conductor within the near field, whereas in the far field, that's less true.
Yes. Chris, got it?
Got it. Thank
got
you.
it. He's ready. He's pumped
Ready for
up
the
to get
lab.
his next little widget EMC tested.
Yep.
So
I mean, Jeff, is that usually where things are going awry when you're doing testing and stuff as well? I mean, or is it more on the product safety side? Like, what are some of the things you've seen?
I've seen a lot of different things. It depends. I think it depends on the type of product. So handheld products that don't have cords, like are not plugged into the wall, are, in my experience, pretty easy to get to pass radiated emissions because there's no antenna. Like the product is physically small. The things that cause the most trouble are cables. And so if your product doesn't have cables, like it's a handheld device that runs on batteries and it doesn't connect to anything, those are usually pretty easy to get to pass electromagnetic compatibility. Even ESD is actually much easier for a handheld product that doesn't have a cable because there's no ground return path. So if you have a product which operates in wired or wireless mode, the wireless mode is typically the easier one because there just isn't as much going on. There's not as much cabling connected to the product. But as soon as you need to connect that to the wall or to ground or to another piece of equipment, now you are going to have more problems on the electromagnetic compatibility side, because not only is ESD much more difficult because now your product has a path to ground, but also those cables are probably antennas at some frequency. And so it really depends on the product. Product safety is much more complicated, and it depends on the flammability rating of components, how much energy, anything with a battery, particularly a rechargeable battery, particularly a lithium battery, is going to be more challenging on the product safety side. And one of the complicating factors is that just this year, the standards are changing. And I think actually the product safety standard just changed like this month. I'll have to go and see if that's been delayed again. But the standard that had been in place for a long time was being obsoleted in favor of a new standard that actually uses a different methodology for evaluating hazards. And
this is part of CE or some other body?
It's so there's an international standards body that sort of defines these, and then these become a part of CE. So CE will require you to comply with these.
Is this like IEC then? Is this like IEC
That's right.
6?
That's
whatever. Okay.
So 6950 was the one that was true for quite a long time, and I'm blanking on the number of the new standard. Okay. But 6950 just, I believe, got obsoleted. I have to go check that. But the UL and other safety organizations within the US also test to those standards, but they're like the US version of those standards, which are 99% the same with some small differences.
Is it 368?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. I just typed in 69. It's 60950, by the way. That's always a confusing thing. 60950 is the old one. And then the new one is 62368. So.
Oh, and it looks like December 30th is the date.
Which is 3 days after this will be published. So you got some time, folks. Yeah. So there goes your Christmas break.
I mean, one of the tricky things is that this 62368 has been coming for a long time, but it hasn't been required until now. And so anybody that's designed a product in the last year, certainly they know that this is a thing. But one of the tricky things about Europe is that 62368, if you have product on the marketplace, I'm not 100% sure if this is true for this particular standard, but most of the standards, you need to make sure that the product that's on the marketplace complies with the new standard, which means that if you made a bunch of product 2 years ago, you actually need to go back and recertify that product if you want to continue selling it in Europe, even if you're not manufacturing anymore. If it's just sitting in a warehouse, it needs to be recertified, which is a huge pain in the ass as a manufacturer, because it means you constantly need to be spending time and money dealing with certification as new standards come about.
The timing is too coincidental. I'm sorry. It's got to be the lizard people globalist agenda at play here. It's got to be. It's all.
Oh, Dave, two shows in a row where you're spouting. Yeah, it's fun.
2020 is so much fun. Come on.
2021 is the year that Dave goes round the bend, folks.
Oh, it's good. It's good fun.
He's revving the engines and he's going around the bend in 2021. Yeah.
Can we go back to something Jeff said at the start, that he's now working from home? Right, and I found that my wife's also working from home as well, and that's now going to be on like practically a permanent basis. Pretty much, they've told everyone she works for a government agency, and they've told everyone that even though the COVID's not really a thing here anymore, and everything's back to normal, they're telling everyone, yeah, you can work from home. You know,
Yeah.
if you choose to. And Jeff, any plans to like, as you said, like you had it by yourself before, and now the wife's at home, and well, it's both of you. You ever thought about getting like a commercial office or something like that, like actually a commercial lab, like I do here?
I've thought about it, but I think I'm at a point where I'd rather.
It is Seattle, so it's pretty expensive.
That's
okay,
right.
right.
I mean,
Okay.
it is actually quite expensive. But I think actually, the saving grace is that when I moved into the house I live in now, I already had a lab. And so I sort of was sure to have a space for it. So, yeah, I mean, I have a small business. It's not like I make a ton of money. And so it's nice to be able to just cut costs and sort of try to do as much out of the house as possible. And I think that's probably true for a lot of small businesses. I've dreamed of having more space somewhere else. I mean, particularly with better environmental control, right? Because if you think about it, I've got all this electronic test equipment, but I live in a 100-year-old house. And so it's not ideal from an electrical standpoint. It's not ideal because it's hot in the summer and it's cold in the winter.
Right.
The calibrations on those multimeters are probably being stressed by just the temperature cycling. But the reality is I don't have any plans to move out. Even with the kit business, I've always been able to keep it at home, and I've got a basement that I can store inventory and stuff like that.
So is there any like commercial property like actually near you? Is there any like commercial industrial business parks? That's kind of like we have here. Like I'm just 5 minutes away from home, and we have a large industrial business park.
There's a range of stuff, and actually right now there's probably quite a lot of
right.
I'd
say you might be able to get a good deal on that.
I mean, one of the challenges is Seattle, I think, like a lot of cities in the United States, is pushing industry out, and it's sad to see that in a way. It makes it a nice place to live, but it's also, as a manufacturer, it's a bit stressful to me to see so many other manufacturing businesses being displaced, and those buildings being turned into condos. Seattle is at the forefront of that, has really been pushing that for probably 20 years now. And so a lot of manufacturing space, in fact, South Lake Union, which is where Amazon is headquartered, Amazon has some ungodly amount of square footage of real estate in big high rises in South Lake Union. Just 10, 15 years ago, that was all low rise, single and two story, light, and maybe not even so light manufacturing. And so it's, I think, it's great for the city. It reduces pollution, improves people's quality of life to have kind of higher end condos there rather than small manufacturers. But I was actually surprised. I was looking for a plating shop recently because I had some automotive parts that I wanted to get zinc plated. And there is still a plating shop in South Lake Union, which is sort of shocked me. I mean, actually, there's a plating shop in another residential neighborhood in Seattle called Fremont that also is shocking to me that this exists because it's totally grandfathered in. I mean, plating shops are like the worst in terms of the number of nasty chemicals that are there.
Well, we got a really good spot by the creek, and that's where all the junk goes. So,
I mean, that's Pristine Creek.
That is, you say that, and that is almost certainly why some of these places are where they are. I mean, I grew up in New Jersey. There's a problem.
Everything is legal in Jersey.
This has been a big problem. Well, that's not true, but there's certainly
that's
a legacy.
That's the line from Hamilton. Sorry, I listen to the Hamilton soundtrack too often. My bad.
Oh, there's a legacy of pollution because of industry, and that's true in Seattle as well. The Duwamish Waterway, which is down south, where all the 737 Maxes are being a time they were being stored down by Boeing Field, which is south of Seattle. The Duwamish waterways are kind of famously contaminated with everything you could possibly think of because of 100 years of industry.
Man, don't talk to me about pollution. I lived in Cleveland.
Didn't Cleveland have a river that caught on fire?
Three different times, as recently as a couple years ago.
Really?
Oh, wow.
The first two times were actually what I'm sure I've said this on the show before, but the first 2 times are what inspired Richard Nixon's administration to create the EPA.
Oh, that's right. And the Superfund
yes.
stuff came out of that, right? So is it the first Superfund site in the country then?
I'm not sure. But the Cuyahoga is doing a lot better. That's the Cuyahoga River. Cuyahoga sometimes. And yeah.
I was surprised to learn. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, you mentioned that Seattle was pushing businesses out. And of course, that's been famously happening in California.
It's not pushing people out. It is
Seattle is pushing manufacturing businesses out.
Economics is pushing people out.
Right.
Sure.
Well, that's famously, of course, happening in California with the California Exodus. And can we go around the table here and ask, was 2020 the end of Silicon Valley dominance?
No.
That's loaded.
No.
Has anyone got any experience with companies, because Musk, of course, Elon Musk has famously come out and said, I am the last auto manufacturer in California and I am the last space business in California. It's like, and even I'm getting out. It's like,
that's totally decoupled from Silicon Valley. I mean, like, people point to that as like a point of innovation, but like Silicon Valley has morphed into like, Facebook, Google, all those other things there. Like, so Silicon Valley is still Silicon Valley.
But there's lots of big companies moving out. A lot of some have moved to Seattle, actually. So
here's the thing. Here I'll answer your question with a question. How many job listings have you seen for? I was just talking to someone about this. How many job listings have you guys seen that say remote first? Right. So everybody's talking about remote. We're in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of people are working remote. How many job listings do you see that say, yeah, you can work from anywhere?
Well, I personally haven't been looking, but
so I keep an eye on them, right? And like it's interesting, but like, and some of the software companies are starting to do that. But it's when it comes down to it, the ones that are like recruiting, some of them are saying it, but especially hardware companies are not saying it. And so it's like, okay, so does that actually? So like, people are looking forward to 2021 and the vaccine's here and like all this stuff. And it's like, okay, well, I don't think things are going to change that much. And, like when you really think about like what's going to happen, there's people moving headquarters perhaps, right? And Elon Musk, Space Karen is moving his headquarters, but like
that's basically what I'm talking about. Cause I keep hearing about companies moving out of California. Like big tech companies.
There's going to be some, but I just think that like that happened every day before the pandemic as well. Right. And like I don't think it's going to have as lasting of an impact. Like there's all these like think pieces that are like, oh, it's the end of cities as well. Everybody's moving out to these low cost areas. It's like, yeah, that's great until everything comes roaring back and people want to be around other people and like cultural events and like, I don't live in downtown Chicago because I want to work near industry. I live down here because I want to be near everything else. And like, I don't think that's changing at all. So, and I think then what happens is the industry ends up forming around the people that end up wanting to live there. It becomes this like centralization problem. And so, I don't expect a loft building in downtown Chicago to have a manufacturing company anytime soon. But I do expect that there's going to still be manufacturing out in the outskirts because that's where the cheap space is. So it's, I don't know. I think the demise of cities and California is greatly exaggerated.
Jeff?
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, Jeff lives in like a place that keeps getting more expensive year over year. I mean, what's the expense growth in Seattle thanks to Microsoft and Amazon and Valve and everybody else that's up there? It's just crazy, right?
It has been accelerating. Actually, there's a lot of interesting dynamics here, and I have to admit I don't follow it too closely. There's a lot of drama locally. Bellevue, which is where Valve is located, and a number of other high-tech companies, Microsoft has a presence in Bellevue, has been growing alarmingly fast, in my opinion. The Bellevue of today looks very little like the Bellevue that was there when I moved to Seattle in 2012. It's interesting. Seattle City, there was this big controversy about a head tax. So Seattle was going to put a tax on big companies based on the number of employees that they had working in Seattle. And I think this was really aimed at Amazon. And Amazon took offense.
What was the reasoning behind this?
I should know the answer to that. I mean, to gain revenue for the city, I
think it's probably based on like square footage versus actual number of employees there. So if you have higher density, right, you would be encouraged to have a high density location versus the number of people that are
Wow.
there.
So I thought it was to help build affordable housing, and I mean it was
Right.
a
Oh,
revenue
it's the output
generation
you're saying.
scheme.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah,
Of course, it's
why
revenue
did we have
generation.
the head tax? Yeah, so the city
Right.
was intending to get money from companies that had a large presence in the city, and specifically Amazon, because Amazon had so many workers in South Lake Union and Seattle in general. And so Amazon said, okay, fine, and moved a whole bunch of people to Bellevue. And so Bellevue has been growing very quickly since then. This happened in 2018, I think. And since then, Facebook has a huge building that they're working on in Bellevue. REI had moved their headquarters to Bellevue, although I think that they are not going to be occupying the huge campus that they built, and that they're going to be going to a remote plan. So, maybe if you go work at REI, Chris, it'll be remote first.
Maybe. Yeah. No, I always want to buy my, my camping gear without trying it. And also,
So Seattle's been growing quite quickly as a region. I mean, the Pacific Northwest, the kind of greater Seattle area, like King County and surrounding areas have been growing very quickly. But I still think that if you looked at venture capital and sort of number of small tech startups in particular, that the Bay Area would still be like 10 times bigger.
Dave, why do you ask about all this? I'm curious. I mean, like, what's the
Oh,
thought
I
process
just
there?
keep. That's all I'm being bombarded with is the California exodus, and it's just I just see it in
So you're just like news
countless
articles.
tech news stories. Yeah,
I think that's the thing. I think it's a sexy thing to write about. I think there is some of it
sounds
happening.
Good. Yeah.
I mean, I think
it's
I think it obviously
definitely
fits
happening,
the narrative.
but what effect it's having is the question.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of this year with, I think, most of the US thinking that the Pacific Northwest was a war zone. And there's been a lot of news about Portland and civil unrest in Portland and also in Seattle. There was a movement earlier in the year that there was an occupation of a park in a part of downtown city of Seattle.
The
Chaz, yeah, and the Chop. And what's funny is that I would talk to people, particularly people out of state, like somebody in Utah or the Midwest I was on the phone with, and was saying, are you guys okay? And I think it's, again, the news has kind of run crazy with this. I live, I think, literally 2-point-something miles from where the Chaz was and the Chop, and my life was impacted not at all. And so it's all vastly overstated. So to everyone, Seattle's fine. We're doing fine. Everything's normal.
So I think, that is why it's an interesting question. I think ultimately it comes down to, like, I know a ton of people that are not in California right now where their jobs are. I don't think that they're necessarily planning to go back right now, but I think that as things return to whatever normality is, I think it's just gravitationally it's going to happen, right? I mean, like,
yeah.
Listen, I worked remote for 5 years, and it is friggin' tough. Like, you want to talk about tough to get someone's attention when you're just a chat message, it's way different than walking up to someone. And this is the basis of our ridiculous telepresence conversations in the past on this show. It's just tough to do. I mean, even telepresence is obviously stupid and sucks.
So I think that there's been this big leveling factor this year where everybody is on the same playing field because everybody needs to be remote, except for essential workers. It's tough. It's easy to forget that actually there's a lot of people for whom this pandemic has not affected their day-to-day jobs at all. Like people that work at grocery stores, now they have to wear a mask.
Oh no! It's like I've seen numbers like fairly common around the world. Like 40% of the population work in some sort of essential business where they're not working. They're out every day, even during the massive lockdowns. There's like 40% of the population.
I think that number is way different for people in our industry, though, right? Like technology, stuff like that.
Our industry is totally not representative.
Yeah, white collar software industry, hardware industry on the design side.
I think software more than hardware too, right? Like manufacturing, bits versus atoms, right? Bits is you can do from a lot of places.
Right. So what I was saying is that there's this big normalizing factor this year where everybody's being affected relatively equally by this pandemic. But I think that as soon as that's not true anymore, you're going to go back to the old problems, which are that for people who choose to work together in an office, they are going to have an advantage in terms of visibility that affects a lot of aspects of their jobs. I do think there's going to be more tolerance of remote.
I hope so.
There's companies that I've worked for in the past that had a essentially zero remote policy. Like no one could work outside of the office because it was so core to their identity that everyone would be in the same room. And I've seen companies like that be embracing having a lot more people work remotely. But I'm with Chris. I think that once this is quote unquote over, which can't come soon enough, in my opinion, I think you're going to see people kind of maybe slowly, maybe quickly revert back to kind of the old way. And I think maybe how that happens is going to be related to what happens over the next year in terms of the vaccine and in terms of herd immunity and sort of high risk, how many people are still high risk and sort of how that plays out.
I heard an interesting thing about like how this was on the Pivot podcast, which is Scott Galloway, who I've been mentioning here on a bunch, and Kara Swisher, and I've really been enjoying that lately. And they were talking about like how like it was a like who's going to get promoted, right? And like who's going to get promoted in a job is probably going to be the person that is on site, right? I mean, it's just like visibility. It's just a number of touch points in a day sort of thing. And then if you think about that, like multiple, micro generations within a, a company cycle down the line, right? If the people are there that get promoted and they're like, I got promoted because I'm here, I'm going to promote people that I'm here. And you could just see it like all rushing back to how it was. Now, I hope it's not that case, but I think that actually
I suspect that's going to be
a hot take on it, like
But I like there has been and will be some permanent change. It's like companies have realized, we can have some people remote work or even most remote work, and my business still worked fine. Because they were forced to. They never would have done it.
Yeah, I think the economic piece is really going to be a big piece of it, of like, we could save money. When you start saying that, it's like, all bets are off the table.
Well, as I've been saying before, here in Sydney, and it's sure it's similar in other countries, the number of businesses I personally know just in my surrounding buildings here that are downsizing is incredible. And they're downsizing because they have a greater percentage of people working from home. Like if it's a real estate agent or something, okay, they've got a third of people working from home now. So they don't need this office. All their lease comes up. They don't need 200 square meters. So they downsize to 100 square meters. It's just the number of businesses I know doing that. So there's going to be at least a couple of year lag on that because they're signing new smaller leases for smaller places. And then usually, a commercial lease, you might sign a 2-3 year lease or something like that with an extension option. So, a lot of businesses will be locked into that because of this change. So if everyone does go back to working from the office, you'll see changes actually come about because of that.
Yeah.
So it'll take a several year lag for it to recover.
I think particularly if the recovery is messy, like if there are setbacks, then companies will become a lot more gun shy. I think most folks are probably still hoping that this is going to be like over at some point, but if it's not,
we'll be playing whack-a-mole forever.
Yeah. So if it stretches out,
it's just a matter of how much people care. It's just a matter of how much it makes the news cycle. Unfortunately, that's what drives it.
Yeah.
It's like, So, no. All
right, let's get into a different topic here. Jeff wanted to talk about Altium.
Well, so I have been working in Altium again this year, and I took kind of a break, like especially in terms of software revisions of Altium. Like most of the work that I did on the Steam controller was in Altium 12 and I think 14. Maybe 16 would have been after it was out. So 12 and 14. And I was very hesitant to upgrade because, as most people that have worked with Altium know, it was a bit rocky there. Maybe it still is, but it was a bit rocky there for a while where new versions of the tool had regressions and were actually quite unstable for a while. I think 14 in particular had a bad rollout. And I remember it was buggy. And so I made the decision, and I'm actually curious if other manufacturers do this as well. So back in the semiconductor industry, it is very common for groups, or at least it was when I worked in that industry 15 years ago, it was very common for people to lock down versions of tools and versions of design rules and things like that through a project. So, say that you're working on a chip for like a year or longer, you don't upgrade your tools during that year. And this went for like Cadence and other big tools like Spectre and stuff, that you would say, okay, we're going to be on version blah for the duration of this project. Well, I did that for the controller because the last thing I needed was to have our schedule be disrupted by a bug in CAD. And so on the Altium side, I said, okay, we're going to settle on Altium 12 for 99% of this project. And I think maybe at the very, very end, I sort of started going into 14 for like maintenance releases and stuff like that. But anyway, as a result, I worked with Altium 8 hours a day every day of the week for a period of years, and I was for all practical purposes kind of an expert or approaching an expert in Altium. And then I took a break. Like, I worked on other programs, and Altium 17 or 18 came out where they did that big UI change.
Yeah, it's a different experience. Yeah.
And I resisted. They went to the dark mode and they sort of moved things around, and I resisted those changes. And I actually stayed on Altium 16 for kind of a long time. Like, I refused to upgrade because I was like, I don't like this new dark UI. I'm going to ignore it. Well, so over the past year, I have forced myself to get back into using Altium 19 and now Altium 20. And I'm sure anybody that uses Altium knows they really messed with the UI between Altium 16 and the Altium versions of today. Like, there are a lot of menu items which do not exist anymore. There's this whole interface paradigm. And the reason I bring it up is I'm not sure if anyone else has experienced this, but there are a few things that are more soul crushing and kind of humiliating than being an expert in a tool and then going to use that tool a couple versions later and not knowing how to use the tool and being clueless and being ineffective and slow and useless. And
I feel this for version 6 of KiCad, just so we're clear. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, it's totally different. I mean, like, there's just so many new things. So yeah.
So Altium, I'm kind of curious about what happened inside the company, Altium, that sort of led to this. But I'm kind of curious because I haven't, obviously I'm quite isolated now compared to how I was before the pandemic. But I'm curious how other designers that work with Altium, how this affected them. Because for me, particularly with sort of the product life cycles I was in, it was really brutal. It was super difficult to adapt to the new change. And I'll say that I'm still not as efficient at Altium now. Like, occasionally I still have a crutch. Like, I'll load up Altium 14 or 16 and be like, wait, how did I do that again? Or maybe I'll even do a board in an old version of Altium, which is actually becoming more difficult to do now because stuff is starting to break. Like, the supplier search and manufacturing parameters stuff is not working because DigiKey and others changed their APIs. And so that's not supported in old versions of Altium. But anyway, it has been really difficult. And Altium, I think, historically was always very good about maintaining shortcut keys and commands. I mean, they were the same even, what was it before it was Altium? It was like...
Oh, it's the same since 1985. DOS version. I am not kidding. I've been using it since
Protel.
The 80s.
Protel. So I never used
Protel. Yeah.
But I heard about Protel, and I know that Altium was heavily based on Protel. I kind of, it's this question of like, is it okay for a CAD tool to do something like that? Like, if you think about...
No, I think it's ridiculous.
The ethics of a CAD tool changing.
I mean, there's this sort of these competing priorities, right? Because, I mean, one of the complaints that I've heard about Altium and a lot of other CAD tools is that they're trapped because they need to retain compatibility and shortcut keys and all that with software of 20 years ago, because that's what layout, PCB designers are expecting. And I guess I'm now in that camp because it was really traumatic for me the way that they changed it. And frankly, a lot of the change seemed unnecessary. Like, it seems like they moved stuff around, and it's not clear to me that it's actually better. So I'm actually curious if there's anybody that listens to the show that's like screaming into their speakers right now that it's better the way that it is now, because I sort of wonder how many hours of productivity were lost because of people like me and other designers who got completely screwed by these changes that came along, because it wasn't incremental. It was like,
I mean, don't they have like a way to like remap though? I mean, like, is that not a custom?
No. They changed things. They
+1 KiCad.
eliminated. Well, yeah, I don't believe in
you
CAD
can turn on
tool
old
wars.
fart mode, and then it just works the way it did in 1985.
I mean, seriously, there's no way to customize your keys or anything like that?
Nope. They moved around functionality.
So that would be like the first thing I would recommend then, right? Is just like make it customizable, and then all of your problems go away.
That would be great, but nope. No, they did things. I mean, they created this properties panel, which incorporates what used to be several other dialogues, and they moved a lot of commands around, and so you have to sort of look for things. And it's gotten easier as I've used the tool more, but it's sort of in terms of UI design, it was such a significant departure for what they had done before that I found it very jarring.
It shows a disconnect between those who write and develop the software and those who use it. I mean, that's why one of the reasons I was specifically hired at Altium, and the hardware team formed, which I was part of, is not only for actually, developing hardware products, but the hardware development boards and things like that, but also to give actual real world user feedback and have that in-house. So like, we're real hardware designers, and we're using it, and we were forced to use each new daily build. Right. So that was like, as we were developing real products, we were forced to use every daily change.
Well, it's interesting to contrast it. So I think that's great, because that's dog fooding, right? And that to me sounds super important to a company that makes that kind of software. It's interesting to compare Altium with SolidWorks. So I also spent a lot of time this year learning SolidWorks, and I got my SolidWorks certification and kind of took the classes and took the tests and everything, and have been spending a lot of time using the tool. SolidWorks is a tool which has not changed in quite a long time. Like, sort of the fundamental user interface has gotten better, in my opinion, over the past few releases. There's probably people that disagree, but the fundamental way that you interact with SolidWorks has not really changed in a very, very long time. So I think, in my opinion, Altium could afford to learn something from the SolidWorks guys and keep the UI the same. And I agree with you guys, make it so that you can revert back if you are, an old guy or somebody that's been using the tool for kind of a long time. Just because I think people need to be able to be effective in these design tools, and you can't afford to have somebody who it probably literally is less effective for a period of months. Like, it's not, I mean, it takes about a year, I would say, to become proficient at Altium if you come from scratch, right? Yeah. Having done a little bit of PCB design, but actually really becoming really good at the tool probably takes about a year of fairly intensive use. And I'd say the same for SolidWorks. So, that's not something to be taken lightly if you're trying to make a living doing PCB design, right? You can't just afford to take a year out. And
this is worse than changing names. Like Mentor is now going to become Siemens EDA. That's on our news list.
Yeah,
and Eagle, of course, is not Eagle. Well, it's still technically Eagle, is it? But now it's Fusion 360. Or whatever.
It's confusing. That's what it is.
It's Fusion Electronics, I believe.
Fusion Electronics. Wow. Yeah. That's even changed, hasn't it? I thought it was part of the Fusion.
Eagle is still around, but it's like, they're definitely pushing people.
It's like a sub-brand now. It's like, oh, by the way, you remember this was Eagle. It's kind of, they just keep it around.
Well, sort of. Yeah.
Yeah. They will drop it. They'll eventually drop it.
I had to use the Fusion version of Eagle this year, and I was very surprised at how little Eagle has changed in over a decade. Like, I'd say Eagle has changed very, very little in over 15 years, because I got into the latest version of the tool, and I own a seat of V5, like way back in 2010 timeframe. I bought a seat of V5. I was able to use the latest version, and it's basically the same tool. Like, nothing has really changed, just the way that you launch it and the name has changed. So, and I'm actually not sure if that's a good thing for Eagle to have not changed, because there's still things about Eagle that are extremely awkward to do. Like changing pad annular ring sizes on like a per component basis is still a nightmare in Eagle. So there's things that Eagle is still very poor at doing, even in 2020. But
so there are changes in these sorts of tools, that like major changes that can be made, that most users would agree on is a good move.
I think that if it fixes kind of fundamental problems with the tool without changing usability. Yeah. And I think that's, to your point, Dave, that's where the CAD groups need to be in touch with the users, right?
Yep.
Because anybody that's using the tool on a daily basis probably has opinions, and they're probably, very informative, very important feedback, right? And I think it's important for the tools company to listen to those guys.
Oh, that's what, that the software developers that get an actual request, say it came from a forum user or some valuable user or something like that, they get like a feature request, and the software guys would start, working, hacking the code, trying to see if it's, possible to do this sort of thing and stuff like that. Then they'd come and show us, and they'd come and ask us, i.e. the hardware team, hey guys, what do you think of this change? And they'd show the change, and we'd use it for a bit, and we'd give feedback, and we'd go, no, that's not really, that's not really working. That's not how we would expect to do it, and things like that. So they go back and, they might make some changes and things like that. Or it might just go, oh no, this is too hard of a problem. We'll put that in the too hard basket, and we won't add that feature because it's, it's too fundamentally difficult to add that to the tool, for example. So without changing the entire database structure or something, like some things are just very difficult to add.
If only there was a solution, guys, for, software that is free and open source and
that keeps changing on you, Chris, as you keep
all the
complaining.
Time. Actually,
about.
I am a little worried about. So the V6 is it's going to be a big shift. It's like it's a one-way street. So once you upgrade, you can't downgrade your files. So that is.
Oh wow!
Why is the reason behind that? That just seems insane.
Because the entire library structure on the schematic side of things is changing, and it's a important and big change. So like there's a video I think linked before where I did like a conversation with a lot of the developers, and they went over a lot of the features, which are very, very exciting. But the biggest thing I think is the schematic side of things. Like right now, each schematic symbol is like tied into a library. So like a library file is like all of the resistor symbols are like in the resistor library. And now it's moving to every resistor symbol is a file in a folder. Kind of style.
Oh, okay.
See, that's the huge difference between KiCad and Altium. See, Altium have always, for the last 30, 40 years, they have always prided themselves on the fact that they don't break their file format and things like that. So you can load in even a new version. I don't know if it's still true, but it was for decades that you could even load a version 20 file into a version 16 and it'll still read it.
Yeah, you can still do that.
That's impressive.
It's like, how do they do that? Right? It's magic. It's coding magic.
SolidWorks does not do that. SolidWorks breaks that every year.
Right.
But yeah, I think you can load 2020 files. So it'll warn you. It'll say this file was created with a later version of Altium. But yeah, it's easy to take stuff like that for granted. But that's really handy.
Altium's always had that. That's probably been one of its strongest points.
Sure. Yeah, I think that is a very strong point. But I think it also is kind of obviated. Like if you're not that's really necessary with Altium because people are buying that one version, and if Jeff sends you a file and you're on 12 and he's on 16, then you're going to get pissed that it doesn't work, right?
Right.
If it's free, it doesn't matter anymore.
No, it doesn't. If it's free, it changes the coding mindset. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
and I think
that is true.
There are definitely downsides. The thing I'm excited about that is like now for revision control and like library management, like I can just go and like be like, oh, look, I added a new file, and it's just like, in Git, it just shows like, oh, resistor 45 is a new type of resistor schematic. That's how it's been for footprints, and it's really, really helpful. So that, and it's just catching up on other things. What was the other thing we were going to ask Jeff about RF stuff. We need to do that before we.
No, okay, bugger off. I guess we still can't remember exactly what the question was from a couple episodes ago, do we?
We have to ask Jeff something.
It was to
Jeff,
do with
tell us about RF.
No, it was, come on. Surely we can remember this. Surely we can jog this out of our memory. It's to do with the power transistor. This is a couple episodes ago. We were talking about the airplane transmitter, and it was about the frequency, maybe. Anyways, I got it. Yes, I remember. There's this transistor. I don't have the link here. Maybe it's in our previous show.
It's not. No,
Chris,
it's not.
You might be able to send it through
it's not
to
there.
the Sorry?
It's not there. It's not there.
The data sheet link? No? Anyway, there was this specific transistor that when I tore this thing apart, it was an RF power transistor. It was, like a ceramic bolt down kind of package with the 4 tabs,
Okay. Yep.
It was, so RF power transistor, but the data sheet said this is a specific RF power transistor for this specific frequency. It was for 1030 megahertz, which is the transmit frequency for the transponder, or 1090. 1030
Okay.
is receive. Anyway, they said it's optimized for this specific frequency. And I'm going, well, why? Like, how bad would that work if you used it at 500 megahertz? Like,
Yep.
yeah. Do you know? Would you have any clue?
So what actually makes that? Yeah, you're right. That's what it was. We were talking like, oh, maybe it's doping or some kind of crazy stuff like that.
No. It's probably because the package is internally matched. So a lot of times what they do, and this is more common with small signal transistors, and this has been a thing for a long time, is that you'll have a device which contains internal matching components. So that could be bond wires that are a specific length, or there could even be passives either external to the die or integrated onto the die. Like there might be a capacitor that's on the die that helps provide pre-matching. And these are so that these components are easier to use. They require less design work external to the package in order to match them to the surrounding circuit. And it also reduces BOM cost and BOM complexity because you don't need to have external components. So that's one reason. And I've seen that done on the die. I've seen that done external to the die, like the multi-chip modules that I worked on earlier in my career would actually have passives like chip components on a substrate along with the power amplifier die. And yeah, it's because RF devices are challenging to match. Like, back in the old days, if you wanted to make like a gigahertz level low noise amplifier, you would buy a transistor, and it was in a package because bare die was only for really high frequency stuff. But if it was like a couple gigahertz, you'd buy a transistor that was in a package with leads. You would get a data sheet and a table of S parameters from the manufacturer, and then they would be like, all right, good luck. Go, have fun. And it's actually not trivial to do that and have the device be stable. Yes. And so I think what manufacturers learned is that a lot of people don't have much of an appetite. Like they don't have the test equipment and they don't have the time and the skill to match devices themselves. And so they started shipping internally matched devices, which are essentially 50 ohms in and out. And those are so simple that you can just stick them on a board and they work. Like you get a 50 ohm
they're
line,
not going to oscillate, or they're not going to, play up on you. They're going to be, linear at that point, and they're going to be.
They're going to have the right noise figure. They're going to have the right everything. Now, for power devices, you can't do that because it's hard to make a very broadband power device, and that's because the output impedance of a power transistor is for like a watt level device is going to be around an ohm. And so matching from 1 ohms to 50 ohms, unless you have a very fancy, unless you have a very fancy matching network, it's going to be fairly narrow band.
And we're talking about 50 to 100 watts here. So
so that's going to be
beefy.
Well, it depends on the power supply voltage.
Okay, so this is a power transistor, and it's really optimized for this one region. So in this case, we're saying it's like the 1090 megahertz.
Yep.
So it's an ohm at the 1090 or nearby it, but then it's much, much more for somewhere else. Is that the idea?
Yeah, it'll be an ohm. Well, it'll probably have a lot of reactance, or it won't be resistive. So it'll look like some weird impedance at some other frequency, and it may not even be stable. And so the reason, the short answer is that they make the transistor for a specific band. If you use it at that band, it's fairly easy to integrate it into the circuit. The long answer is that a lot of times you can actually pull those devices away from where they were supposed to be matched. And the ham radio guys have been doing this for a long time, where they will take a device that's matched for 500 megahertz and they'll use it at 440 megahertz because it's close enough. As long as it's within like 10-20%, you can usually tune around it. It may not be as efficient. It may not work quite the way it was supposed to, but a lot of times there's some latitude to sort of pull things around. One of the complicating factors is that big power devices typically have a lot of Miller capacitance between the input and the output. So like the gate and the drain, or the base and the collector, there's a lot of capacitance that's tying those together. And that means that as you match one side of the device, the other side changes. And so before we had nice software to do these things and good models, this is why a lot of RF engineering was called cut and try. And I am a veteran of cut and try engineering, because I spent hours and hours and hours when I was first starting my career trying things and tuning and trying things. And you end up working on the output side, and then that changes the input, and then you work on the input side and that changes the output, and you go back and forth and back and forth. And for big power devices, it's a real problem. So yeah, that's why. Makes it easier.
Sweet. We have our answer. Yep. That makes absolute sense.
So we had couched this whole thing in like Jeff designed power amplifiers for preamps rather.
Nope, I did power amplifiers. I was a PA designer. Yeah, power amplifier designer.
Oh, I thought that was preamp. It's power amplifier. Okay.
No.
You can see where I'm confused. Okay, so what was? I'm sure we must have talked about that on the show before, but give us a little reminder of what that actually meant at the silicon level. Like, so you were designing stuff like this, like the big.
I was not a silicon designer. I was a gallium arsenide designer. So silicon is not so even today, like 15 years later, CMOS silicon or even silicon germanium is not used for some high power applications. I think CMOS, RF CMOS silicon has made significant inroads. And I just saw a picture of a Agilent or Keysight device recently that I'm pretty sure was a silicon device. But for a very long time, gallium arsenide was king for power amplifiers. And even like iPhones and consumer electronics devices use gallium arsenide and not silicon for the final power stage, both in terms of the RF power amplifier as well as the antenna switch. And, I haven't designed in that industry for a little while, and things may have changed in the last 10 years, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's still largely the same, because that stuff moves pretty slowly.
Well, there's lots of exotic stuff like silicon on sapphire, isn't there? A lot of like mobile phone RF stuff is done on silicon on sapphire. And
that's right. You can make really good switches with SOS. Yeah, silicon on sapphire. There's also gallium nitride, which is the newcomer, silicon carbide.
We should also call out the Adrian Tang, who was on the show, I think this year, maybe last year. He was an early silicon CMOS, a CMOS RF designer. Like he did some of the early stuff with that. And that was, well, if you want to hear me being completely confused during that episode, holy crap. Like he was selling stuff. He was saying, I still literally feel like I blacked out during that episode because he said so many things I don't understand. Highly recommend it though. It is very fun.
So to answer your question, what was it like being a power amplifier silicon designer? Well, I wasn't. I was a gallium arsenide designer. But the way that worked is that we were making power amplifiers for initially wireless LAN, and then I worked on WiMAX. Do you guys remember WiMAX? That was supposed to be.
I remember hearing about it, but I never knew what it was.
It never really caught on. That was in the 3 gigahertz band. It was around 3.5 gigahertz, and that was going to be cellular. I think was going to merge with WiMAX, and that didn't really work out. And then eventually, I ended up working on cell phone parts, so like GSM, CDMA, stuff like that. So anyway, you've got this die which is made of gallium arsenide, which is a compound semiconductor. It uses elements from columns 3 and columns 5 of the periodic table. And the reason that you do that is that it has unique material properties and electrical properties compared to silicon. So there's trade-offs though. So gallium arsenide doesn't have complementary devices. So all computers are made of logic gates, which require CMOS pull up and pull down transistors. You can have N channel and P channel devices.
Hence the name, CMOS, complementary metal oxide semiconductor.
So with gallium arsenide, there is no complementary. It is all N channel and NPN transistors. They're all the bottoms. And for pull-ups...
all that PNP rubbish. Yep.
You don't get PNPs. You get resistors or you get stacked NPN transistors. Like you don't get it. As a result, you're in a process which is very good at RF, but only has N channel or NPN devices.
Would that mean it's a lot of power wasted?
If you were making like a digital circuit, digital circuits are not good. That's a disadvantage of gas. And so most modern RF modules will actually have a CMOS die, which does all of the control. And then you'll have a gallium arsenide RF device that's in the same package. And it's because you're sort of taking the best of both worlds. You take your CMOS controller, you combine that with a gallium arsenide switch or a gallium nitride power device, and you sort of get everything. But of course, you pay more because you have multiple die in the same package. But anyway, we would design these amplifiers in CAD using modeling tools like ADS, Advanced Design System, which is an HP Agilent Keysight product. Used to be ESOF way back. And then you would fabricate them, on multi-project wafers, which are like the Osh Park of, gallium arsenide wafers, but usually done at very few fabs. Like it's not like CMOS where there's fabs around the world. GAS is much more specialized. And one of the companies I worked for actually had a fab in-house in California. And then you'd make wafers and you'd put them in packages and you would test them. And testing was a huge part of it because modeling was always a few steps behind where we wanted it to be. And so we always did a tremendous amount of hands-on testing. And you'd be on a test bench with a spectrum analyzer and a signal generator, and you would be measuring the linearity of the devices, the output power, whether they oscillated. I made some good oscillators in my day that were supposed to be amplifiers. Does the device blow up when it has a lot of reflected power? Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that GAS has been so successful in cell phones is that it has a very high, there's this product of the bandwidth of the device times the breakdown voltage, and it's sort of a figure of merit for an RF device. And so that product sort of tells you how good a particular technology is, and CMOS is sort of in one side of that chart, and then gallium arsenide is in a completely different spot because it has a very high RF performance in terms of its ability to amplify at high frequencies. But then it also is very rugged because it has a high breakdown voltage. And so what that means is that if you take your phone and you set it down on a table, like a metal table, and all that energy from the antenna reflects back into the power amplifier, it doesn't blow up. And CMOS has made big strides, and almost certainly in the last few years, since I've been following that industry, has probably continued to make inroads into mobile phone type products because they've sort of worked around those limitations in a lot of ways. But for a very long time, and probably still to a certain extent today, gallium arsenide is king. And but the models have always been somewhat challenging, and so there's always been a big emphasis on what we called cut and try engineering, which is build it and test it. And RF has always been a pretty hands-on field, but in particular, power amplifier design was always considered kind of a black magic, one of the more black magic-y corners of RF design. And as such, there was a lot of emphasis on actually testing physical hardware. And I think that's kind of where that's why that appealed to me. I enjoyed that a lot. It was frustrating that the models were often not great, but I also enjoyed being in the lab and testing stuff. And I was really good at eking out the last 0.1% of efficiency. So I don't know if that answered your question. That's what it was like. That's a day in the life of a power amplifier designer.
Yeah, I mean that's a good rundown, I think. I mean, yeah, that's great.
No, it's fantastic. Yeah. We found out. Yep. That makes perfect sense. And that's kind of what we expected. Yeah, it's specifically matched at the die level for that frequency. And there's various ways to do that. So yeah.
Yep.
Cool bananas.
What else do we need to talk about? Oh, I wanted to talk about one last thing. Was past guest of the show and sometimes host during Christmas time when during Chaos Communication Congress, Peter Esdentemsky, he is launching a new Kickstarter in 2021 or sooner, maybe even this next week. But it's going to be the Glasgow Interface Explorer, which is like an FPGA based like serial terminal thingy. It looks really cool. It's basically like it's like a bus pirate on crack times 1,000.
It reminded me of the bus pirate, actually. That was my first thought.
It's like the most flexible bus pirate ever,
Right.
Yeah. So you can define like any interface you need to talk to with it, and then have really fast interfacing to it through scripting and computers and stuff, and through like Python. So pretty cool.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, Chris, this one's up your alley. Can we talk about this briefly?
Sure.
because it made a bit of to do. This is Mark Rober. You might be familiar. He's a ex-NASA, ex-Apple engineer who now does, YouTube videos. He's got like 20 zillion subscribers or something. So he's absolutely huge. So he's an engineer like us, one of us. But he's released a paid engineering course. And it's on some monthly.com, which I've never heard of before, but it's like a like a Udemy kind of thing, where you pay, except you pay for individual.
Yeah, so like Teachables like that, where it's like you could buy a course from someone.
You pay for an individual course instead of an all-you-can-eat. You pay one fee and you get access to everything. This one, you just buy his course. Anyway, I don't think anyone has any problem with the course. Like, everyone seems popular. Everyone wants it. But the scandal, in quote marks, all the to-do about it seems to be about the price, which is 299 Yankee bucks. Normally 499, but it's now it's. I don't think it'll ever be that, but it's $299 for the course, and
$249, but it's not that big a deal.
Oh,
$50 difference.
Yeah. Sorry. So it's $250, and I think, well, the market will. That's fine. The market will decide.
Yeah. I think I was on what you were talking about too. It's like, he has a big. You had said on Twitter, like, he has a big enough audience. If only 50 people sign up, it's still worth it, or whatever that number was. And it's like, that's great. I think the downside is that a lot of people are hungry to take courses from someone like Mark, and Mark makes. I mean, his videos are fantastic, and he's talking about like making the. Talking about how to tell the story too, which is something that I think is not talked about a lot. I think it's something I could even learn from. And like that, it's like, that's valuable information. So I see why people are disappointed by it. But
it should be mentioned that he spent a year on this apparently, which doesn't surprise me at all. It's if you want to complain about, course, go and make your own course and see how much work it is. So
forgive me, guys. What is the subject matter of the course?
It's like how to do engineering kind of thing. It's
sort of. It's
and
like
it takes
how
you
to
through
build
projects.
I think.
You build 3 projects, and he helps you along the way.
But they're projects of your own making, so it's also like ideation and like how to. So I think that's probably the thing that I would be most concerned about. Is it's like there's not as much guidance. It's like soft instruction in that way. It's not like do step A, do step B. It's more like come up with step A for yourself.
Encouragement.
Review with your
It really sounds like he's consulting. I mean, if you
think
about it from
it's the community thing. It's basically you join the community and you get feedback from the community. And maybe him, he might jump in occasionally, but he's saying, don't expect me to jump in personally for everyone's project kind of thing.
So what are the videos about?
So it's about basically him explaining his process. So like how he does ideation, how he thinks through, how he'll source. So he's showing his own projects there, right? So that's a lot of what's out there. And that's something that's like how I operate as well. When I do contextual electronics, it's like me just I'm basically showing how I do it. I expect people are going to follow along and do what I'm doing. But people could try and abstract that away and say, I could turn around and say, okay, now go and come up with your own circuit idea you want to do. I think that's unfortunately is one of the harder things to do. I think if he does it well, that's just very impressive in that way, but it's tough.
Yeah, it's just showing it's showing his particular process. Like, here's how I come up with the idea, here's how I do the specifications, here's how I plan out what it's going to look like and how it's going to work, and here's how I execute it. Here's some example suppliers. Here's my go-to tools. All that sort of jazz.
Yeah, I think it's closer. So like when I saw it, I was like, oh, that's kind of like Masterclass is another one that's out there. That's very famous people teaching something about their method, right? And basically that's like you get 10 videos and you're going to watch how Hans Zimmer does composition for his thing, but that's really you're just watching. You're not doing anything. This is closer to like more like a Udemy or dare I say a contextual electronics where you're building a thing, but it's it's still that you're watching, it's kind of this soft thing. It's like a soft requirements. It's let's come up with all these things together. Let's do some feedback. Let's have group building. Now, I think if they actually build the social piece in there, that's actually really important, right? To be able to like have people to interact with. that is super motivating, I think. So
this sounds like an MBA program, right?
It's exactly like that is exactly
like
exactly
class
it, yeah.
projects, and
Yep,
you got to find your partners that you're going to work with, and then you sort of have this time frame and this overarching curriculum and this reason to be focusing at this moment together with other people. But it's less like a class. Well, it's in between a class and a workshop. It's sort of something different.
It's a mix. So the controversy here is the price. People think, oh, he's taken advantage of his viewers at $250 a course, and I think, well, no, he's put a metric crap ton of work into this, and only a certain
he's got to eat.
Well, yeah, I think people look at it and they say like, oh, well, he's making so much money on YouTube, and it's like I feel like that's just
that's the argument.
Is that a straw man argument though? Like, I mean, like that is completely like this is about a value proposition, and like I'm very much I didn't think there was an argument to put this at all. Like, people don't like the price. Here. That's understandable.
Why I was defending it from day one. I thought, and if it fails, it fails. If nobody's interested, but people seem to think that because he's a successful YouTuber, he owes it to owes it to his fans who've made him to make it affordable to them, right? So they seem upset that everyone wants to watch it, but they don't want to pay $250. And then when I ask people on Twitter, well, how much would you pay for it? They go, and they don't give an answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yep.
It's like they expect, because he's, he earns millions. It probably earns, I'm sure he's earning millions of dollars a year on YouTube, right?
And he's a production team, I think, now too. And like, he's doing just fine. And like, he could just do what he wants to. But he spent a year of his life working on this, right? Yeah. It's like if you spend a year writing a book, even if you're a successful author, would you expect people to give it? Would you expect them to give it to you for nothing? Like, just here's the PDF. You can go, no. Yeah, right. Thanks. Thanks, Stephen King. Hope this next one's as good as the last one. The last one was free, and I didn't really like it.
Yeah, I don't see the argument here, but quite a lot of his fans got irate that it was.
I think it comes down to social contract, right? I mean, like in this case, it's like, so like the social contract of YouTube is I watch a thing, maybe I watch some ads, maybe I skip some ads, but I'm willing to do that because it's free, it's free interaction. This is now a different social contract, I think, because this is, is moving towards true education. And it's like, that is just a different thing. It's a different caliber of delivery. It's a different method of delivery. There's different overhead. And the delivery method is like, it's just, there's more cost to it.
It doesn't fall under the existing social contract, I don't think.
Yeah.
But maybe because we're invested in it, Chris. Like, look, I've thought about doing a course that I have, like a video course of, some tutorial video course, but actually put a shit ton of work into it, cover every aspect and make them all the same. And, it'd take me like a year to make these videos or something. But once I do, I could release it as a set course. And it's like, well, am I going to give that away for free on my channel? It's like, no,
nope.
I'm going to, right? I'm going to charge for that. Of course it would be a paid, thing. It'd be a paid content thing.
Yeah. I think this is where it's tough. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like, I often go to like, a YouTube to try and learn something. And there is a lot of great content out there. Like personally, I have learned things from you, Dave. I've learned from other users making videos and stuff like that. Like, I think there is a lot of knowledge there, but it's not super focused knowledge, right? It's not like I want to get from point A to point B. And there are in certain fields, right? Like you could maybe go and say like, how do I change the ball valve on, this pipe or something like that? Like I've done that before, right? And there is that like piece thing. But if you're trying to say, how do I plumb my entire house? There are so many like iterations or permutations that are out there. Right. Like, that you were basically paying for someone to say, here is the way that I think is best to do this thing. And that's that's valuable information. Valuable. That's you might go and pay a plumber for that sort of thing. And it's not just replacing a ball valve, it's designing in every single pipe that's in your house. And it's like, okay, well, I either pay a plumber, I pay for this knowledge, and the plumber is a guaranteed thing that's, well, not guaranteed, but it's, it's much more highly likely that it's going to work. It's going to be more expensive. This is kind of that in between doing those things. And then maybe there's also, I could just go and try and figure out from just the ball valve videos and try and figure it all out myself. But somewhere in between all those things, there's some amount of money for value transfer, I think.
Jeff, as a non-content producer, essentially, what's your take on that?
I just had a thought, and that is that if I paid $300 for a course, I'd probably be much more likely to participate and stay involved.
Yep.
So I wonder if that's not also an important ingredient, that if he's trying to create something where there's a community and where people are working together and helping each other, I think that having the price be, some significant number is going to be likely to keep people motivated, because they're going to be highly incented to try to get their value back out again. So I think for a workshop environment, that actually seems like kind of a good deal. And I don't know specifically much about the class, but $300 or $250 does not seem unreasonable for a class. I mean, I've spent more than that on my own dime as well as the company's dime to take. I took Henry Ott's EMC class a while back, and that was not a participatory thing. It was, you just go and sit in lectures, and I thought that was super valuable. And I also took Tufte's visualizing information class a year ago or 2 years ago in Seattle, and I also thought that was great. So yeah, I mean, I think that if somebody's put together a workshop where there's going to be a lot of engagement between participants, that having a price of a couple $100 seems totally fine to me.
Yeah. I think skin in the game is a very important thing. And I think, like I said, I think the social contract piece it's especially shocking, right? Because it goes from zero, I think I mentioned on Twitter.
Yeah, it goes from 0 to 250. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the chasm, like Chris Anderson writes about in Free, right? So like we've had Chris on the show before, but he wrote that great book about Free back in the day. And the chasm between free and 1 cent or sub cent or whatever is like huge. Going from absolutely free to paying 1 cent is like this huge gap you have to get past. And so most people won't cross that. And it's like, okay, so now getting from like 1 cent to like $10, yeah, you're still gonna have some people in there, but it's it's gonna fall off as well. So then going from $0 to $250, it's like, this is you're in the wrong stadium, buddy. So that's where that, I think, also runs into problems.
I think that there is also an advantage to kind of keeping the riffraff out too, like signal to noise ratio.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
If you're in a forum where there's 3,000 other participants who have no skin in the game, like you said, Chris, I think it's a totally different dynamic.
That's what a massive online open courseware thing is, right? It's like, and then by the end you get 3-4% success rate, and and so I think you're right that there will be, whether or not it was the intent, I think that having a skin in the game element to it. And like I think I said elsewhere too, like some people can't afford that. Like that is just legit a problem.
Oh,
and so like I always hope that there's, sponsorship opportunities, whatever, but I think there still has to be something.
But there's tons of free options. You can do it the entire MIT engineering degree for free. Yeah. Every single lecture of every single course, every single subject is available online for free. So I like there's no shortage of stuff out there.
Yep.
It's just, I don't get the hate for this one. It's like, I don't get it.
Well, I mean, I hope he does well. I mean, like I think that's
I hope it goes well.
Maybe the next one would be cheaper. Who knows? Like, but I think that it's an exciting thing. So.
Oh, and by the way, I think the company approached him to do this.
Oh, totally,
and he's probably getting paid. He's probably getting paid an upfront thing. I don't know that for sure, but I'd be very surprised if that's not the case.
Interesting.
So,
why would you go and spend that much time on it?
He still spent a year of his life on this. It's not like he's, this is just some throwaway thing for him. He's, he's put a metric shit ton of effort into this, and but not just effort, but passion as well. He seems very passionate about it, and yeah,
definitely.
And if you can't afford it, well, sorry, it's not for you. I mean, just go find something free or lower cost.
Yeah. I do think there's a lot of interesting things around, I'm obviously very interested in like, how do people move towards like a thing that they really want to be doing, right? So they want to go build a project like Mark builds, or building circuit boards or anything like that. I think it's tough because like there's just so much, like I said, there's so many permutations of how to like learn a thing. I was actually I just had a call with I'm on like an alumni list for my university, and a kid just called me who's a freshman, like super driven, super smart kid, really had fun talking to him. But the thing I kept coming back to is just like, have that one thing you care about, like have that one thing you want to build, because that like focal point is so important to like figuring out what you need to learn next. Like one of the hardest things I think is figuring out like, what do I even need to, like, so Jeff, you went and took this visualizing information class. I'm not sure what that was for, but like, maybe you'd have to go and take something like that. And you didn't even know that 6 months ago. You didn't know that course existed, but you can go and find it then. And I feel like having that project or that end goal is almost as important. So I pointed to like Joe Bernard, who's like the BPS space, he's doing the model rocket thing. Like you look at all the things that Joe has built and learned, it's like crazy because of all of the different fields he's had to learn in order to get those rockets off the ground. And like, but that's been the focal point, has been the rockets, and all of the knowledge has come because of that.
I like to balance it. Like I am a person who is naturally very curious and enjoys learning things as a pastime, like a hobby, like things that are even outside of electronics, like outside of the scope of the amp hour, especially during the pandemic. Like everybody, I was baking bread and learning how to sharpen knives and doing all the things that people decided were important in 2020. But I think that you're 100% right. To me, that's where learning becomes work, though. There's learning for fun, like sitting in front of the fireplace and reading a book about some random subject, because that's a fun way to pass time. But I think there's also the being prepared to fail. It's as soon as you actually start a real project, you are going to fail. And to me, psychologically, that is much more significant. Like that is now work.
It's harder to start.
It's good work. It's important work. It's necessary. And to be honest, I think it is much more efficient. Like, if I want to learn how to TIG weld, for example, it's great if I've got a reason. Like you're only going to learn so much if you just TIG weld scrap metal together in the garage.
That's right. Yeah. Look at all this crap I made. Scrap plus scrap equals scrap.
Yeah. If you try to build a car, all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh, there is so much that I don't understand about TIG welding because I didn't actually have an application. And I think electronics is the same way. Even CAD, like Altium, I had noodled around with the new interface and I was like, oh yeah, this is super different and weird. And
no, you can't do it. You got to lay out a real board.
And then you start a board and you're like, oh man, like this is awful because I can't be effective.
Just want
anymore.
to do that one thing there.
And you can't realize that unless you start that real project.
Right. I think it is, I learn a lot personally through failing. And I think that by having a specific project, you have a objective, you have a reason to be learning. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I actually think that for my own mental health and my enjoyment of my hobbies, I need to balance it. I like to learn about things just for the sake of learning them. And I do intend to often apply that knowledge later. But I think a lot of times there's this more fun side, which is let's just learn about this fun thing just for the sake of learning. And maybe there are some potential applications. And I think it's good to have a balance and to do both. But I agree with you that the learning with a real thing is a more effective way of forcing yourself to learn something, especially quickly.
And that'll be the thing with Mark's course. If you go in it with a project in mind that you want to do, you'll get vastly more out of it than you will if you just go in, oh, I like Mark Rover and I'm cashed up. Yeah. I've got $250. I'll take this course. And it's like, man.
I think they're going to do, I think that's some of the ideation piece, and they're going to try and help people find that. But yeah, if you have like some areas that you're more interested in too, I think that would also
you're way ahead.
Be helpful. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the right take. Yep.
Cool bananas.
Is Keyzermas over, guys?
Oh god, it's an hour and 47 minutes. I think we're getting close to being over.
I'd like you guys to know that the entire time we've been recording, I've had Nick Offerman's Yule log on one of my monitors here, and he's sitting in front of the fire.
I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
Jeff and I were discussing the fact that he just got a fancy new chair delivered for in front of his fire, and that we were
from Amazon?
Talking about not from Amazon,
not from Amazon, no.
But like also scotch and like the idea of hygge, which is am I saying that right, Jeff? Hygge?
Oh,
Hygge. It's like a Danish thing. It's like
coziness.
Coziness, yeah.
No,
and we were talking about scotch and stuff like that. And so I told Jeff about this thing. Nick Offerman is the guy on Parks and Recreation who plays Ron Swanson, and he's an
American
comedian
TV show.
Okay, got it.
And anyways, he's sitting there just like literally just holding and sipping a glass of scotch in front of a fire for like many hours. And it's just like, that's the entire video. It's very relaxing to watch. It's very relaxing.
So there's no, he just sits there. He doesn't talk or anything.
Yeah. I'll send it to you. Oh, yeah.
Yep. I just posted a link to the chat.
And I'm sure it's got like 1 million views and a million thumbs up or something, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's fantastic.
I'm partial to the Darth Vader Yule log. Have you guys seen that one?
I've not.
That one's a classic. I'll post a link to that one as well.
Yep.
Oh, it's like the first
just him
YouTube
breathing?
hit.
Yeah.
No, you'll see.
I got to see it. All right.
Well, Jeff, I hope you have a wonderful 2021. I'm sure we'll talk. I'm sure we'll have another Keyzermas going here.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It was great.
No worries, mate.
Yeah. Good to have you back. Talk to you next year.
That's it. We're done. Catch you next time.
All right. Bye, guys.
Keyzermas happens but once per year, but the warm, fuzzy feelings and tidings of Keyzermas joy happen all year long thanks to our patrons. Join in the giving spirit of our patrons at patreon.com/theamphour. You'll get a discount on Amp Hour merch that you can use for the next Keyzermas or the intervening high holidays like Dabawali, Krasnoween, or the sighting of the Easter Bunny Huang. A special thanks today to our corporate sponsor, Vimeo.